Dream Vision 7 Radio Network welcomes Seek Reality with Roberta Grimes, heard every Monday at 11 a.m. and 11 p.m. Eastern Time. Using nearly 200 years of abundant and consistent afterlife evidence, quantum physics, consciousness research, and ancient writings, we seek to understand who and what we are, how reality works, the nature of God, and the meaning and purpose of our lives. Join Roberta weekly to better understand our one reality and gain insights into how we can make the most of the glorious eternal beings that we are.
Welcome to Seek Reality with Roberta Grimes. Joyous conversations about what the afterlife evidence and modern science combine to tell us is true about our one reality. You have nothing to fear. You are eternal and you are perfectly loved. Knowing the truth changes everything. Now, here's Roberta.
Welcome to Seek Reality. I'm Roberta Grimes, and I'm delighted that you can be with us today. I try not to admit my failures, but one of my personal failures is the fact that I cannot meditate. I'm sorry, I can't. Back in the 70s, my husband and I tried to learn transcendental meditation. It was a big thing for him. And he became a meditation star. To this day, he meditates for half an hour every day before lunch. He used to be kind of high-strung, but he's much more peaceful now, and he swears that meditation is the reason. On the other hand, I spent a few days at that time, way back in the 70s, trying to take meditation seriously, but then I gave it up. And that was way back, decades ago. He still teases me about this sometimes when I tell him, look at all the time you're wasting, a whole half hour a day. And he tells me, well, look at how you're so hyper. So anyway, maybe we can now begin to resolve this marital issue I have. But I just have to say, frankly, I'm a meditation washout. And it's embarrassing to admit that because more and more I'm teaching spiritual practices and empowering people's spiritual growth, but I still can't meditate. I tell myself it's not necessary, but sometimes I wonder if I'm right about that. So I've invited a meditation expert to share with us today both why meditation is important and helpful and how perhaps we could learn to do it more easily. 18 months ago, Kelvin Chin was our guest on Seek Reality to talk about his book. This is really a great book, Overcoming the Fear of Death. Before I met him and listened to him and read his book, I was sure the only way to overcome the fear of death was to learn enough to be sure about an afterlife. But that's not his approach. Kelvin's approach is to help people who cannot believe in an afterlife to nevertheless become peaceful about the fact that all of us will die. But in reality, his métier is meditation. He once worked in international law, but now he's a stress management and meditation expert and he's been teaching meditation worldwide actually for more than 40 years. So when I told him I was a meditation dropout, he said basically, oh, that's nonsense. And he volunteered to join us today to discuss common mistakes in meditation. But first, he's going to tell us what meditation is and why we ought to be doing it. Welcome, Kelvin. I'm delighted that you're with us again.
That's great to hear you and be on this show with you, Roberta. You're cracking me up already with your introduction.
I know he thinks I'm silly, but that's part of the fun of doing this work is we get to be a neophyte, and I really am a neophyte in this area, and I'm learning right along with everybody listening. Now, tell us about your background. You started to meditate when you were still in your teens, right? Right.
Yeah, I was a teenager when I first learned meditation, and much like your husband, I got involved, and yourself in the 70s with Transcendental Meditation, TM, as taught by Maharishi Mahesh Yogi at the time. He had taught the Beatles to meditate in the late 60s and so forth, and I had learned several years after that. I should interject. Yeah. He's the one who taught us, too. I mean, funny little man. He's the one who taught us, too, but... Right. I'm sorry. Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
That's what you're doing.
And so I was actually taught with that organization for about 10 years, 8 or 10 years, and then I was an international leader with that organization, actually.
Wow.
But then I moved away from it when they started going in other directions, basically, and I stayed with the meditation, and I have since removed the cultural and religious overtones and connotations and aspects from the teaching and the practice. And so I call my practice turning within meditation now, but it's an easy, effortless process. I've actually made the technique even easier than what I used to teach in the 70s. So so it's a very easy, eyes closed process. I've made it more flexible. You mentioned your husband's doing it for he's gone for a half an hour. I have people doing it 10, 15 minutes twice a day, eyes closed. That's it. That's all you need to do. I've made it more flexible, easier technique, and so forth. So we can get into that.
Well, maybe you can teach him, because one of the things I tease him about is, of course, half an hour a day times 40 years. Look at all you could have done if you hadn't been meditating. But I am coming to respect meditation as I really never have before. But you were 19 or something when you started with the Maharishi.
Yep. Yeah.
And so what made you at that, if you can recall, why did you
Sure.
get started so young?
Oh, I absolutely recall like it was yesterday. I was 19 years old, and I was at Dartmouth College. I know you went to Smith. Is that right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're practically neighbors, you and I. Yes.
I know. So I was up the road, up Route 91. Those are
Yes.
people who know the geography in New England, and I was really, and as you know, Dartmouth, not unlike Smith, very high pressure college, and so I was really stressed out. Bottom line. And a lot of pressure. And, unlike a lot of some of my other colleagues, classmates, I actually had to study. So some of these guys, they go to class.
It always hold you up, doesn't it, when you've actually got to do the work?
You actually have
the same problem.
I actually had to read the material. Some of these guys, they'd already read it in private school or something. I went to a public high school, and
Totally.
so it was very stressful for me. And when I learned meditation, it washed it all away, all the stress away. And my memory improved. I was able to concentrate better after my meditation, and we'll talk about how that's a common mistake in meditation. The meditation technique should not involve concentration, should not control and focus, should not involve that. But it does help to help focus and concentrate after you're done. So those are the huge takeaways for me immediately.
So you were a young man trying to get through Dartmouth, and this was back, when college was a lot more serious than it seems to be now. We really did have to work hard. We really did have to get excellent grades if we wanted to go somewhere in our lives. So you were stressed, and you were just looking for a way to relieve your stress. And
that's it.
And Maharishi was hot back then. So you said, I'll just go try this. And
Yeah.
you did, and you found it helped you relieve stress almost immediately.
Immediately. And interestingly, in terms of the Seek Reality themes of your shows, which obviously I'm very familiar with, that was how I started. But then it opened up this whole spiritual, knowing myself kind of vista to me that who knows when and if that would have opened had I not learned meditation.
Well, that's another excellent point. There actually, I find as I hear from people every day, sometimes I spend most of my day just trying to answer comments and emails from people, but I hear more and more from people who come from all different directions towards spiritual growth. I was just reading this morning that there's a record exodus from churches. People are seeking, but they're not finding it anymore in churches, or even comforted to think they might find it in churches. So this is a moment when everyone is basically seeking at some level. And you find this is one very useful intro. If you haven't been spiritual before, if you begin to meditate, it will begin to help you orient yourself spiritually. I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Exactly, because the phrase that I use is knowing thyself, and it's not my phrase. We've heard that phrase for thousands of years. Know
Right.
thyself. Go inside. It's kind of a Greek notion. Jesus said it, as you know, and you and I've had lunch together and talked about, Jesus and his notions on this. It's knowing thyself, going within, the kingdom of heaven within, the going within oneself to know thyself, enhance one's self-knowledge. And so, in addition to relieving the stress and anxiety, deepening sleep, balancing emotions, all that stuff, it enhances self-knowledge. Well, that's the crux of any spiritual pursuit, whether it's religious, whether it's non-religious spiritual pursuit, it does not matter. That's the crux of everything, is going within oneself, which is why I call this turning within meditation, and knowing oneself, those nooks and crannies, so to speak, of ourselves better, and expanding the conscious capacity for our experience. That's the critical notion.
That's beautifully said. But don't you find that a lot of people are afraid to get to know what's inside? What if they don't like what they see?
Well, exactly. And so that's why the stress and anxiety component of this meditation technique is so critically important, because you're right. Sometimes people have fears of different aspects of themselves.
Right.
But what are those fears based on? Fear, I always say, and you remember from the last segment we did together, fear is the emotion caused by the anticipation of unhappiness. Well, if we can reduce those elements that could potentially cause us unhappiness, then our fears go away. And that's what the meditation technique does.
Yeah, one of the first things that you said when in the emails we exchanged as we were going forward with this is that you stripped away all the religious stuff, and you think that was very important, right?
Yes, absolutely. I think that let me just first say, I think it's logical why there are so much religious and cultural trappings, I call them, around meditation, but they're not necessary. It's logical why it occurred over the millennia, because where did it come from? It came from out of certain religious traditions, whether it be Vedic, whether it be Sufi in the Middle East, whether it be Buddhist, whether it be Christian, quite frankly. Whatever the tradition that it came out of, those people who were doing it and then teaching it, obviously they tend to wrap it up in their cultural and or religious traditions. So it's logical why it kind of occurred that way. But I always thought, you know what? I'm a world citizen type of guy. And it's like, does it really have to be so isolated in that religion or that culture or whatever? Isn't it really a mental process that every human being has?
Yes.
And so I, as you say, I removed all of the religious and cultural trappings from the way I teach it. And now I've taught 20 people from more than 25 countries now, every religion. I've taught Buddhist monks to meditate. I've taught Christian monks and priests and nuns to meditate. So, and they still do their other meditation. There's no conflict with what I teach. I tell them just don't mix techniques. And the Buddhist monks would all come back to me and afterwards, and they say, wow, we get more out of our Buddhist meditation in the monastery now after doing your technique. So it's really independent from religion, culture, whatever. It can be anyway. And I argue that I think it works even better that way, because you don't have all these other associations and trappings.
More and more, I think we're coming to see that religions of all kinds were a passage, part of the spiritual growth of humanity, and we don't need them anymore. And the main problem with religions is they are all based in fear. Meditation is one of the many techniques to be used to raise your spiritual vibration away from fear and toward love. So if you are meditating purely from a religious standpoint, it's sort of like, stepping on the brake at the same time you're stepping on the gas. It retards you really considerably, so it's not surprising that these already spiritually oriented people, Kelvin, who hear that they don't need to do whatever magic things they were doing. It's no question that they would be able to step right into what you do. So what is meditation anyway? What is it? Can you describe it in like a sentence or two? What is it?
So I would say the meditation process is, first of all, eyes closed in terms of technique. We can get into more about the technique in a later segment. But eyes closed, 10 to 15 minutes twice a day, allowing the mind to experience itself in a different way that we happen to be labeling meditation, is what I tell my students. We could call it anything. We could call it making popcorn or whatever. It doesn't matter what you call it. But what happens is the mind experiences itself in a different way. And the way that I describe this is it allows the mind to expand beyond what I call the supermarket aisle. I call it, we walk down the supermarket aisle in the supermarket and we're thinking, do I need almond butter? Do I need